Dia ou noite? Exatas ou humanas? Cidade ou campo? Poder fazer escolhas significa conquistar um dos maiores desejos da humanidade, a independência. E o Sebrae acredita que empreender é uma porta para a independência, que está aberta para as pessoas de todas as idades, gêneros e que buscam mais opções para suas vidas. Para o Sebrae, tão importante quanto incentivar negócios a darem certo é apoiar pessoas que transformam sonhos em projetos de vida, que ajudam a gerar empregos, desenvolver a sua comunidade e a transmitir a cultura empreendedora no país. Um lugar onde todos têm liberdade para escolher, inclusive escolher empreender. Sebrae, a força do empreendedor brasileiro.
A moda da Malve não tem ponto final, igual a sua. Nós acreditamos que pequenas atitudes transformam o mundo. Quer mais atitude do que mudar o seu jeito de escolher? Moda inteligente, feita de um jeito mais sustentável que reflete o seu estilo. Uma peça de roupa pode viver muitas histórias, por muito tempo. Não é sobre ser descartável. É sobre você e sobre o mundo. Malve, moda sem ponto final.
Hello, everyone.
Olá a todos.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Or good evening.
Boa tarde a todos.
I am Carol Perlinger, co-founder of Rio Ethical Fashion. We are very happy to have you with us today. It's been a great day already with so many more interesting sessions to come. So please stay with us after this session as we have another panel taking place right after, and you can check our agenda at rioethicalfashion.com. We are now going to talk about the blindness around CO2 emissions. And in order to do so, we will be doing a deep dive into the study of Veja's production chain and its CO2 emissions. I would like to welcome two amazing women, Lilian Liu, who will be moderating this conversation. Lilian is a senior sustainability strategist at Futerra, a consultancy with a mission to make sustainability so desirable it becomes normal. And Ligia Zottin, who is responsible for impact and compliance at Veja, a brand that has been making sneakers with a positive impact since 2005. So Lilian, over to you now.
Thank you so much, Carol. Thank you for being here. I'm really, really excited about this discussion with Ligia. We, I think, hear a lot about fashion and the impact on climate. And in the last couple of years, there's been a real uptick in interest from, both consumers asking, what is the carbon footprint of my products, and kind of having a lot more conversation about climate change and the responsibility of brands. And at the same time, we use these terms a lot. We talk about GHG emissions or carbon or CO2e, but I think there is a bit of science that needs to be unpacked. What does it actually mean for a brand like Veja to do a carbon footprint, and what kind of impact does it have for the company? What kind of business decisions does it influence? So really, really excited to have this discussion today and to hear from our panelist, Ligia, who will give a presentation on the Veja study. I think, just in terms of setting the stage a little bit, I will leave it over to Ligia in just a minute to actually share the study findings with us, and then we'll have a discussion. We'll make sure to have plenty of time at the end. So please stay with us, have coffee if you need it. I'm sure, it's afternoon for some. So let's keep the energy up because we have a really, really interesting conversation ahead. And just to kind of, set the scene for where we need to be, we are now at 2021. We've had the Paris Agreement being signed off 6 years ago already. And we know that in order to reach our 1.5 degree target that all the governments have set together, we actually need to reduce carbon emissions by 45% by 2030. And we need to reach net zero by 2050. So that's like a lot of numbers. What do we really mean by that? Well, if you're looking across the board, we're actually going to have to cut carbon emissions by about 8% each year this decade. So all the way up to the 2030. And when it comes to fashion, of course, there's a huge impact on climate, actually. Then there's a myth saying that fashion is the second largest polluter to oil. That's not true, but it is true that there is a big impact. Fashion actually is responsible for about 10% of global emissions of carbon. And that's more than, maritime and shipping industry combined. So it's a big impact. And, Ligia is going to take us through what exactly that impact is coming from and what you could do to reduce it. So without further ado, I just want to welcome you again, Ligia. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I hope you are having a good day. You're calling in from Paris, right? I want to welcome you and really hand it over to you. Do you want to take us through some of the key findings that you had in your study, please? Oh, and you're muted, so.
Yes, I'm going to be sharing a presentation. 1 second, very quickly. Do you see my screen?
Yes, looks good.
Yes. So we started, I started at Veja in 2018 and it was 2019. And of course, we were talking about the Paris Agreement and all the carbon impact. And we decided to do ours. But the challenge we got, we want to measure everything. We don't want to miss any part of our supply chain. We knew the materials are a big part of the impact. So that the founders of Veja, they challenged us to gather as much as possible for this study. And these are usually what is measured. So when we're talking about upstream, we consider the cotton in northeast of Brazil that we're buying, the cotton from Peru. We consider the rubber coming from the Amazon. We consider the leather we use for the shoes, the energy consumption in the factories, all the transport between materials and the factories, also delivering the shoes to Paris and to the different warehouses we have all over the world. The impact of our offices, everything was taken into account. It was a lot of work gathering a lot of this information. And I think it was a big challenge because especially the first time you do such a study, you're using metrics that are not used for business. So for example, I was asking the kilometers run and they say, I don't know, Ligia. This is not something we take into account. We want to know the price or we want to know the weight, but we don't really know the distance. And we don't have this registration here in the company. So it was also a lot of learning and talking and seeing which kind of information was available at the time. But I think also our team learned a lot from this. And this is the impact calculated for 2019. And probably are having the same reaction as the team had. They said, okay, 36,000, it's a lot, but what does it mean? Huh? So it had like tons of CO2 emissions. It's quite complex and super technical. We did a quick calculation to make it a bit easier for people to understand. And it's the same as 6,000 homes during a year using electricity, or around 4 billion smartphones charged, which this should be around 19 times the Brazilian population charging. And Brazil is a quite big country, so 19 times the Brazilian population charging a smartphone, it's a lot. And I think here it's interesting to see this E right after CO2 emissions. So it means that we are not only considering carbon, but we are also considering other gases that contribute to global warming, such as methane and nitrous dioxide. I think in Portuguese is nitróxido de oxigênio. Then they do the translation. And so we consider everything. Of course, carbon is the most common one. And that's why they convert everything to carbon, but we took everything into consideration. And also, it's common to split the results into scopes. So in scope 1, we have the direct emissions of the company. Scope 2, we have the energy and heating consumption from the company, not our suppliers or factories. And then Scope 3, it's everything else. And then when you see here, it's very funny because Scope 1, we have 0.03%, which is absolutely nothing. Veja owns 2 cars in south of Brazil that our team is going to factories and visiting. And then Scope 2, we use renewable energy. 95% of the energy we use in our offices and shops are from renewable sources. So it only represents 0.10%, which is also quite low. And then the rest is 99.87%, which is quite a lot. And it's interesting because when you're following guidelines, it's mandatory to share Scope 1 and 2. But 3, there are no guidelines. You calculate as much as you want. And especially for the fashion industry, it's very tricky because companies might be calculating Scope 1 and 2, but then Scope 3, that it's actually where the impact is coming from, you're not calculating, you're not sharing. And here it's an overview of our results. I don't want to go through everything because it can be very detailed, but I think I would just want to point the raw materials that represent 71%. And the biggest surprise was the use of leather. Out of this 71%, actually 97% is coming from the leather. Even though leather is a byproduct of the meat industry, it still represents a lot in our carbon footprint. And yes, I think that's it. Just a quick overview. Now we're working in our 2020 study, and I hope we have some really good results and reductions.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And I just want to congratulate you on the study. Doing something the first time is always, the toughest time. And even in my day-to-day working with companies on climate strategies or circularity or sourcing, Veja often comes up as a leader. And so I just want you to know that you guys are really inspiring brands, large and small, to also take action. So thank you so much. So it's an exciting study. And I think, what we want to do in the next 30 minutes that we have together is unpack a little bit about what it means to have a big Scope 3 footprint. I think we probably have an audience that some are very knowledgeable about carbon emissions, and others it might be newer to. So just from a broader perspective, I would love for you to talk a little bit about, these findings. So you saw, for example, that Scope 3 was essentially the biggest impact that you had. Do you have any of those big takeaways to share? Was there anything, for example, that really surprised you as you were doing this work?
Yes. So we had the leather that has a huge impact, but also the logistics. We mainly use vessels to ship our goods, but it happens that sometimes we have delays and clients, they want the shoes as fast as possible. And then we have to use airplanes to deliver the goods. And in this study, we found out that 80% of the shoes were sent by vessel and 20% by airplanes. But this airplane represented 91% of the emissions for logistics. And this was a huge surprise. Our team, they were not expecting this. I think besides the leather, this was definitely the biggest surprise we had. Now our team is looking for solutions, of course, working to not have delays, but also looking for sales boats that we can work and different systems that we can make our logistics more sustainable.
Yeah, and I love that you're already, thinking very actively about what you can do to address these footprints. From maybe a broader point of view, has it changed somehow how you think about your different priorities on sustainability? Or also, I'm thinking, across the value chain, whether it comes to some design choices or materials or sourcing. I'd be really keen to hear, how you are really taking these findings forward in the business.
Yes. So when you do carbon study, basically you're considering averages. It's very difficult for you to know exactly how much piece of leather, for example, produces of CO2 emissions. You're using average studies that already exist. We use 2 different types of leather, one that is tanned with chromium, and the other one without. we know that this one without uses less water, less electricity, produce less waste. So we know it has a better environmental impact. And yes, leather, even though it has a big environmental impact, is also a great material because of its durability. So our studio, they were very surprised, and they're really changing the collection. So for example, 2019, I think we only used this chrome-free leather in some models, and now the whole kids collection is actually using this material, and we are pushing more and more for more sustainable materials, also focusing on the canvas and B-mesh or recycled PT uppers instead of just focusing so much on the leather. So
yeah. Are you also looking at, just to follow up on that, are you also looking at, alternative types of leather, or is that still further ahead in the future?
No, we are using one that it's basically our canvas, so the cotton produced in northeast of Brazil with the upper in PU and corn. But in terms of durability, and this is something we should actually start, because when we're talking about CO2 emissions, it's also how long the product lasts. And at the end, we know the leather lasts much longer than a synthetic leather, but we are also working on this subject.
Yeah, fantastic. And I guess I'm also just aware that, many of us might have not done a carbon footprint before. So can you share a little bit about that process? If I'm a brand, where do I start? How long does it take? Like, what's the kind of effort that you have to put into this process?
So for us, it was a big challenge because we wanted to do as much as possible. It took from 6 to 8 months to have it calculated. But I also believe that perhaps the smaller you are, the easier it is to calculate. But I think you should really map your activities and where your materials are coming from and collect data. Also work on the knowledge of your partners to collect the data, really understand your business and collect the data. There are some, I think, what's the name of university in Brazil? Getúlio Vargas. They have a very good, Fundação Getúlio Vargas. They have a very good tool for beginners to understand. And they have a lot of working groups doing this kind of calculations and have many easy ways to understand how to start with. So I would also look for something that is a bit more ready, or look for partners.
That's great. Yeah. Definitely. I feel like leveraging the knowledge of partners and not trying to reinvent everything yourself is so key in sustainability, because we don't have a lot of time and we have a lot of work to do. So yeah, I fully I understand what you're saying there. I guess when it comes to, the overall kind of climate ambition for the business, and potentially any goals that you might be setting on climate in the future, how do you think this data will help you to inform that? And can you talk a little bit about just where you think your ambition on climate is going as a company?
When I started at Veja in 2018, they said, Ligia, we don't speak and we don't promise anything. We share once we're done, but we're not going to promise that we're going to reduce the emissions. We have this in mind and we talk every day about it, but we're not going to post, no, 2030 is too far away. We actually have to act now. So of course we are looking for science-based targets, and we want to set targets and commit publicly. But now we are just talking internally and acting to reduce our CO2 emissions.
Are there any, I think, I talk with a lot of companies that either are going to set science-based targets or in the process of it. And I was wondering if you could share a bit about why that's difficult, right? Because I think as a consumer or as an audience, you might say, why aren't companies just doing this today? Like, can you share a little bit about that thinking and what is required to really get to those commitments?
In our case, I would say, because we started very basic. It was the first year we did the study. I think there's a lot more that we can do to actually know better our impact and to be more secure about the measures we are doing and the calculations. So this is something we're working this year. And once we have everything set and we have a solid methodology, then we want to commit. But it's also quite difficult to commit with science-based targets because most of the impact is actually coming from our supply chain. So of course we are talking to the suppliers and we want them to know, and I think the more you talk, the more conscious people are about the issue. And yeah, you hear once and then you hear twice and then you start to understand how important it is. But it's very difficult to engage and say, hey, you should start buying renewable energy. So it's difficult for us to commit because it depends a lot on our suppliers.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the first step is to actually get the data, right? You can't manage what you don't measure. And so this is really very much the first step, but there is no quick fix really to this. You have to work very holistically with many different teams to really drive down those emissions. And I know you guys are already using renewable energy, for example, in your operations, the offices. So I think you've already, dealt with a lot of those more obvious solutions, right? So very excited to see, the other initiatives coming from this too. I think you also mentioned a key point here around how carbon emissions are very technical. And I think we also need to do a better job in really educating consumers and our suppliers about these issues. So I'm wondering if you have an opinion around, how you as a brand could potentially better not educate, but really talk about and raise awareness around climate and around carbon emissions. I think your report is a great example of that, and would love to hear your take on it.
It was a very good exercise because I'm very technical. So to me, yes, talking about carbon, it's quite easy. But working with the communication team, they said, what is this? What is this E? Why do I keep forgetting? Why is it so important? So it was really a good exercise. And I think they were also interested to learn more. And yes, trying to keep it simple write the text in an easy way that everyone can understand. I think this is very important, but also to be joining this kind of initiatives and to be talking about in an easy way so everyone can know about this issue and the work that companies are doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully, we'll inspire some of the audiences to take action, and also hopefully to ask some questions, which we will take in a little bit. But before that, I have a few more questions. I guess, doing what you do, I think Veja is a really inspiring brand, and you are setting an example for many in the industry. What excites you most about this work? What gives you hope? I mean, we talk a lot about the crisis around climate change. What is it that you feel very, more optimistic about being in this space?
I can really see a change from 2000, especially with the employees' mindset. I can really see a change since we started the study, and I was explaining to them why I was asking these crazy questions, something that they never. Why did I want to know when they left Paris and they went to, to visit a client, and why this was so important? And this is something that you can see that people are changing. They are way more aware, and they come to me and they say, Ligia, this is one of the founders, Ligia, I'm compensating my CO2 emissions. I took the train, I came by bike. So this really gives me hope, because I think, we started talking to people, they did not know anything about it, and now they're actually taking action.
Yeah, the employee piece and, just having colleagues that care makes such a difference. And I think that's something that we're seeing too a lot as we're working with mostly bigger brands, but also some small brands, that a lot of this is really driven by passionate employees that want to, work for a company that, isn't killing our planet, frankly, right? So that's definitely, I would agree that feels like a really positive thing that we've seen in the last couple of years. I guess, looking maybe broader in terms of challenges for Veja, we've talked a lot about climate. Would you say that carbon emissions is one of your absolute priorities? Do you also have any other kind of big issues, or are they all interlinked in a way?
Carbon emissions, yes, it is a big priority. We have projects going on, but we're always taking CO2 emissions into consideration. So for the distance and the impact we have, I think it's also a big challenge because the company is growing so much. So is it really sustainable to grow? But also, at the end, especially because most of the CO2 emissions are coming from raw materials, that we're going to increase our CO2 emissions. So how are we going to do this? And also a big challenge for us right now, it's the end of life of the shoes, because now with fashion, sometimes people are buying more shoes and the old ones are still good. And what do you do with the shoes once their life is over? Especially we are producing shoes and delivering all over the world. So how do we do it? Should we gather the shoes? Is it better to put some effort in recycling? So this is also a big challenge we are facing right now.
Yeah, and obviously that's an issue for the whole industry, right? You can't really necessarily solve this as a brand alone. You will have to partner with recycling and infrastructure partners. But that is definitely feels like if we can unlock that piece, that will be very big as well. I actually had a question coming in, which I would love to ask you from the audience. It's from Ligia. I hope I pronounced that right. She's asking how COVID has or has not impacted the carbon footprint that you did. And what can we expect now from, coming out of the pandemic, hopefully very soon? Is there a difference?
Yes. So for this year, 2020, we did a calculation for scope 1 and 2, because at the easiest, of course, we're still calculating scope 3, but we can see a reduction. For example, scope 1, we have the 2 cars and people are not using the cars. The offices were closed. So yes, I don't have the numbers right now, but we've seen a reduction in the CO2 emissions. But also we would like to take into consideration the impact of people doing home office. Because at the end, they have their computers on, they are using the light, which in a normal day, they would be in the office. So we also want to see this and take this into consideration. But Ligia, wait, we will share the results quite soon, I promise.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And honestly, I've been doing some research on this topic of working from home, whether it's more environmentally friendly or not. And it depends on the study that you're reading, but there is definitely a impact if you're starting to calculate like the energy that I'm using and the heat that I'm using to heat up my home versus everybody sitting in the same room. But obviously you're saving on transportation and other emissions. So not a fully clear-cut answer on that one. And I think the science is still emerging. So we have a few more questions. So one question is from Bianca, and she's asking, what tools do you use to control and keep track of your supply chain? Obviously, we know that supply chain is where a lot of the impact is. So just if you can comment a bit on that, the efforts around supply chain carbon emissions.
For our supply chain, and this is a very easy question. We have a team. So we have 2 employees in Northeast of Brazil that they are actually working every day with the cotton associations. And we have 2 employees in Acre that are dealing every day with the rubber tippers. So this is the best way because we have people and they visit them and they know what's going on. We don't use any fancy or super technological tools. We just have the team there involved.
And to follow up on that question, we have another one that actually relates to the supply chain as well. And I understand if you don't have the answer right now, but how can we work with the supply chain then and these people on the ground to move towards more sustainability? And I think that encompasses both the carbon emission piece, but also other things. How can you, as a brand, help your suppliers become more sustainable is really the question here.
Oh, I think there's not one company, as far as I know, doing the work that Veja is doing, really to tracking the cotton to farm level and working with them. So I think this is the first step. Understand your suppliers, understand where the material you're using is coming from. And then you can definitely work with them and see the practices and measure and see what's the most sustainable. But for us, actually, they have a positive impact that we did not take into consideration because it's quite complex. For example, we have the rubber tapirs in the Amazon. They are protecting the forest. But to calculate how much carbon they are storing or keeping, it's very complex, so we did not use it. But the carbon emissions coming from the rubber and the cotton are so small. Like they are, it's not really comparable with the rest.
Yeah, and I think you make a great point that you obviously have a lot of visibility into your supply chain, and you can actually work closely with each and every one of the suppliers, which is a really great advantage to have when you're trying to make change happen throughout the value chain. I think understanding and having that knowledge is the first step, and starting to engage in a conversation, not making it feel like it becomes a necessarily burden, but trying to be supportive as well in the change and really be open about the benefits and do as much as we can to support rather than just say you need to change this. Excited to see what comes out of this. Let's see, I'm just looking at the list of questions here. We have one from Tatiana. She is wondering if you could share a little bit about carbon emission solutions involved in the transportation piece. So you already talked a little bit about marine versus aviation. If you could just dig a little bit into the transport piece and the logistics, that would be fantastic.
So how we have the factories in Brazil, and they are using trucks to go to the harbors or to go to the airports. And then we use either vessels or airplanes, and we have warehouses in the US, Australia, and Paris. And in Paris, for example, we are not using the truck. We are actually using a barge to deliver the goods. So this is a sustainable solution. We hear and we are searching a lot, but it's also this kind of companies, they always say, no, for 2025, we're doing something or we're launching something. 2030, which is a bit too far for us. But there are some solutions for vessels like sailboats from Brazil to Europe. Still something that it's beginning. I think 1 or 2 startups are doing this kind of work, but this is also a solution. And we are looking for deliveries in Brazil that can be done by electric cars and electric trucks, because this would definitely help us to have a smaller impact.
Definitely. Thank you so much. I'm going to ask a final question, and then we're going to, unfortunately, have to end the panel. We're out of time. Just wanted to ask you if you have any final thoughts around, how our audience can get engaged with this work. If you have any call to action for those that are listening and viewing.
Definitely. I think I'm sure this topic is quite complex, but try to understand better what the thing you're buying, what is it made of, where it was produced. You don't really need to know the kilograms of CO2 produced, but once you start doing a bit more research, it's easy to understand that it has a smaller environmental impact if you're buying a t-shirt produced in Brazil than one in China. So I would say, yes, start asking more, start reading more about the topic. And the most important thing for me is really ask yourself, do I really need what I'm buying? Because everything we do, everything we buy, everything we use have an environmental impact. But at the end, sometimes we're just buying a lot of stuff that we don't really need. So ask yourself before buying it.
Yes, 100% agreed. Informed choices and ask a lot of questions. Yeah. I think that is a great call to action. And I just wanted to say thank you again so much for this work. Keep us posted. We're looking forward to seeing the next study when it comes out, and hopefully the emissions will have gone down even more, right? I know you're working furiously on this, so thank you so much for sharing your knowledge. Thanks to all of you for viewing as well. We are gonna close the panel. So
thank you.
Take care, everyone, and have a good afternoon.